Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to part 2 of the mini-series about guns in the United States. Today we're going to be talking about gun control, and since the last episode was pro-gun, reasons for gun ownership, legality, that sort of stuff, today's episode is going to be in favor of gun control so that we can see both sides of the debate. I personally am not in favor of more gun control, and while I can see these topics very objectively, or at least I like to think I can, I do worry about my own biases creeping into the video, so I thought it would be best to bring in an outside opinion that is personally anti-gun or pro-gun control, however you want to say it. Say hello to JX23.
Hi there, everyone.
Would you like to say a little bit about yourself briefly?
Yeah, obviously I am from England. In the United Kingdom, we have very strict gun restrictions. You can't own pretty much most firearms. You can get shotgun licenses, but in general, guns aren't something that most people you would know would own, maybe in rural areas, farms and things. But yeah, in general, I suppose because of this, I'm quite pro having gun controls, stricter gun controls, because obviously I live in a society where it's not really a major problem and incidents are very few and far between. So I'll be here to talk about things from a perspective of someone who has experienced that kind of culture, maybe put some different spins on reasons against some of the arguments for less gun control. So
very well said. And we also have here with us Sergeant Merrill. I actually put this question to Twitter looking for commentators that were pro-gun control, and somebody got the messages mixed up and they recommended me to Merrill, who I looked at his channel and I saw that he shot a lot, and I'm like, well, this is a guy that shoots a lot and he's for more gun control. Well, come to find out, the subscribers got it backwards, and Sergeant Merrill is actually rather anti-gun control or pro-gun, so this is going to run as a debate where I'll kind of pose a question, Jay will answer, and then Merrill will retort. Merrill, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, I think we got trolled, man.
Yeah, pretty much.
My name is Sergeant Merrill. I do have a channel here on YouTube, and it's very obvious from my channel that I'm a firearm enthusiast. I was in the military for 8 years, the United States Army, but I don't consider myself a gun expert, just someone who's an enthusiast about firearms, and I really love getting into the games and seeing how they're represented and stuff like that. And I mean, just like you, I like to be objective about the debate between gun control and not having gun control. And unfortunately, in these days, you got to pick a side. So I've been leaning a lot more toward not having the gun control that's being discussed right now. So happy to be here, even though, you know, it was a little bit of a troll, but I'm looking forward to it.
That's okay. I think this is going to work well with one very pro, one very against, and I'm going to try to moderate as best as possible. I would highly recommend that you look down in the description, you click part 1 of the gun laws video where we talked a lot about the history of firearms in the United States and our gun culture and some of the reasons that we own guns. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. We're just going to be hitting the specific ones. The number one reason I would like to talk about, as pertains to our Second Amendment rights in our Constitution, is the number one reason that we were originally granted privileges to own firearms was so that we could overthrow our own government. And that's a very unpopular thing to say, even in these days, even especially in modern times, but it's true. The reason that we were granted these firearms was because our country was founded by people that were paranoid against tyranny. They escaped British tyranny, and they were paranoid that we could have a new king in the United States or something like that. So they wanted an armed citizenry, an armed militia, so that we could overthrow our government or kill corrupt officials or something like that. And John, I would like to hear what you have to say about that sort of fail-safe protection.
Okay, well, the only problem that I really have with that argument is it kind of sounds like if you're going to think like that, what is even the point in having a government, really? Like, if you're just going to have a society where people just, if they don't like something, well, it's okay, we've got guns, so we'll do that. That's what we'll do about it. I thought, you know, in the developed world, we lived in, you know, democratic societies where if there's an issue with government, then, you know, it goes to elections and terms. Like, this whole idea of, like, World War III happening within a country, obviously like a, you know, some civil war because of some tyrannical government. It just seems like something that in the modern world wouldn't really be plausible if something like that was to happen. I know America likes to, you know, keep itself to itself in terms of, you know, no influences from outside, but if there's something like that was to happen, similar to how America does around the world, the rest of the world would have a major problem with any kind of tyrannical government within the US, and there would most likely be a world war started, not just a civil war in America, if these things were to happen in a modern day government. So I understand that that's why it happened, but I just don't see its relevance as much in today's culture. So
to carry on with your point a little bit, would you mean more of a we would have our own internal civil war, and the other countries would be playing via proxy to gain favor of one side or the other, hoping that they would win, and it would be in some way economically beneficial to them?
I just think because most people talk about the reasons of, you need the guns because in case of a tyrannical government, whereas if it was that kind of government, sure, there are ways that it could be done subtly and, in such a way that it wouldn't look like there was a huge problem in America and whatever. But if there was something truly tyrannical to happen, basically something that just is against the rights. I mean, we have these, Geneva Conventions and all this kind of thing to kind of monitor that kind of thing in particular. And although obviously the US doesn't like to worry about what's going on in, Brussels or whatever, the conventions of the UN too much, but those things do exist to stop that kind of thing happening. I'm sure obviously more Americans will be like, well, I don't care what they do, I'd rather be able to protect myself. But yeah, that's just generally the consensus. I just think some people who say that argument don't really look at it in terms of, well, the world in general wouldn't just go along with that, and we're all so closely, together now that it wouldn't just be the defenseless people and the government if there were no guns and something big was to happen. So,
well, I think that was a very good point. Meryl, would you like to counter in any way?
Yeah, I would. And I think at first it's important that anybody listening to this, that they first calm down. I think that's the largest problem going on with this debate right now is everybody gets so passionate on both sides. People are jumping to conclusions, rushing to do things, and I think that's a big part of the problem right now. People just need to calm down, sit back, let's objectively look at this, look at the stats, look at the statistics, and we'll find a solution. Now to jump to a quote, this is from Edmund Burke. He was actually an Englishman, and he said, the people never give up their liberties unless under some delusion. And the delusion right now is that more guns equal more violence. And we can get into the crime stats and show how that isn't true. But right now we're talking about, why the Second Amendment was brought into place. And a lot of people misunderstand our founding fathers. They think we're talking about, cowboy and Indian times. They think that we were speaking about muzzle rifles and black powder rifles, and that they didn't consider the weapons we would have these days. And if you look at what our founding fathers have said, what they're quoted on, it has nothing to do with that. If y'all bear with me, I'll quote a few people. Thomas Jefferson says, "The constitutions of our states assert that all power is inherent in the people, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed." Then you have Patrick Henry, and this is a little bit of a longer one, but bear with me, it's important. He said, "Are we at last brought to such humiliating and debasing degradation that we cannot be trusted with our arms for our defense? Where is the difference between having our arms in possession and under our direction and having them under the management of Congress? It is our defense to be real. If our defense be the real object of those arms, in whose hands can they be trusted with more propriety or equal safety to us as in our own hands?" Now, I got one more quote, and this wasn't from an American patriot. He said, "This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future." And that's Adolf Hitler. So I think people are misunderstanding our founding fathers and their purpose for this Second Amendment. And I think they really need to consider why. What is the reason people are trying to get rid of the Second Amendment before they just go ahead and do it? Don't give up your rights under some delusion.
I'm going to break in and moderate here a little bit. You got a little bit off, a little bit less specific than what I was hoping for, though I do appreciate the input. What you're talking about is the concept of negative liberty, and I talked about this in the last video, but in the United States, at least in the way our legal system works, the people hold the power, and we grant the government a list of powers. Anything else is reserved for the people, and that counts as literally anything. Many other countries work the other way around, where some sort of governing body or kingship or a parliament or whatever holds the power, and they grant the people a specific list of rights. It could be a long list, but then anything else is reserved for the government. Ours is just kind of the other way around, and that's what Merrill is getting at, is that we try to retain as many rights as possible, even if those rights are inherently dangerous, because we're kind of brought up to believe that more rights equals better. And we're getting way off my list of topics. I had it in a nice little order, but I've been dragged to the side. Here's here's a question that I would like to pose. It's a little bit more philosophical. Most people would argue that a truly free society is best, where anyone can do anything at any time, and truly free means that I can do quite literally whatever it is that floats my boat with no consequence, as long as it doesn't harm another person, which means I could buy a tank if I wanted one. But the reality is that our society is more complicated, so because there are crazy people who buy tanks, or irresponsible people, something bad will happen to eventually, 1 out of 1,000 of them. So is true freedom better represented as a sort of infinite liberty, do whatever you want, or is true freedom better with more laws that set people on an equal and safe playing field? Because there are people that believe in both.
Well, I'll just say, like, freedom is great and freedom is everything. And I think most people, even in countries like that I live in, where, we have controls on guns, strict gun controls, we still feel like, in general, there is freedom. We don't feel like an oppressed nation or anything. We elect governments to do what we tell them to. If they don't do what we want, or we don't agree with what they do, we can elect other governments, and we can even start our own parties. And if things got really bad, sometimes at the moment, like you see, there's some really bad things. Things that people feel strongly about that the main parties aren't really dealing with, and you see these kind of less classically less well represented parties who have some quite strong views about those things, and they become a lot more popular, and eventually they're kind of sliding into the mainstream. And so I suppose when you talk about freedom, it's true. I mean, the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, that sounds great, but, people don't always know what's best for them, and that's why we have governing bodies. And that's not to say that, someone else tell me what to do. You just do the best you can with, learning from the past, experiences, putting out to the public vote, democratically coming together, people, and then you put these ideas forward. If people don't like these ideas, they're free to, create their own governmental system and start that up from scratch. It's although I live in a country where you're not free to have a gun if you so wish, that doesn't mean we haven't got freedom in terms of our rights, really, because we live in a democratic society. People are elected, and we don't, for the most part. I mean, obviously there's hints of conspiracy and worries about government control in every society, but for the most part we don't tend to worry too much in terms of that people, they're trying to take our rights away, because we know we can vote and we can do something about it. But I suppose we feel free. We practically, I'm just saying, we as in my country, we feel relatively free without having the ability to do whatever. Most people
well.
can understand the
both of those philosophies that I mentioned, when executed properly, you end up in similar places, which is surprising because they're so opposite. Meryl, would you like to reply?
I just I'm all for the government. I understand the government's purpose. Obviously. You do need to enforce some laws for the better of society. It's the reason that it's illegal to drink and drive. I mean, when you look at that, there is a very, very proven and good reason why I can't drink alcohol to a certain point and then step into a vehicle. I understand that. It's been proven to me through both statistics and examples, and I understand something like that. But what is trying to be proven here is that more guns equals more violence, and that more guns in society makes it worse for the society rather than making it better, and I just haven't been convinced of that yet.
That's a very good point.
People bring up examples.
Sorry, continue with a few examples.
Go on, if you've got examples, go on. That's fine.
The what?
You're going to say some examples of something, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, people will bring up. They start to use examples as reasons why guns aren't good for society. A lot of people right now are using Sandy Hook as an example. Now, these mass shootings, I think that's a completely different debate as to, apart from gun control. But I can also give you just as many examples of people who were saved because of firearms. I mean, especially here in Texas, it's happened 3 times this week, all with an AR-15, where a homeowner, one included a 14-year-old, was able to save their family because of a break-in, because they had a gun. The 14-year-old was going against 3 guys. And a stun gun isn't going to get the job done. So I don't think it's reasonable to use examples to prove your point, because they're on both sides.
I will agree with you on that point, that picking specific examples is usually not a good idea to make a
Right.
macro decision about something large like gun ownership. That's kind of leading into two or three different of the topics that I've got listed here. I'm going to move into one that's probably the most simple, and this is open to either one of you if you want to answer first, because this is something that cropped up a lot when I asked my fans. Do you believe that more guns equals more crime, and that guns cause crime? And a corollary to that, do you believe that guns make crime worse?
Well, personally, from a British standpoint, I'd say I think crime is relatively the same based on whether you have guns or not. I don't think it's proportional to guns at all. And it's more to do with society in general and where your society is in terms of, you know, how happy people are and how well it's doing, and financially, especially, I mean, economy has a huge input, I think, in crime. If people don't need extra money, if they're happy in their lives, they won't commit crimes in general. So I think those are the keys to crime. I don't think guns come into it. I mean, just because we're a relatively gun-free society doesn't mean there's no crime, and I think that's just because, you know, criminals are criminals for the most part. Our society is quite similar to other Western developed societies like America and other developed countries, and there are criminals, and the fact that they can have guns or not doesn't change things. I suppose the only thing is, one thing I kind of like to say about the whole gun debate, and the only reason why I think people from like overseas, especially like myself, I wouldn't want to say, oh, nobody can have guns in America because we don't like you having guns. It's more like we just don't. We see all these like cases of these mass shootings like regularly, yearly, if not more regularly, in schools and so on. And all the people concerned about is that, you know, is there anything that could be done to prevent this happening, you know? And I've kind of gone off on a tangent to what I was talking about, but, you know, if you want to basically just answer the question, I'd say that I don't think more guns is more crime and less guns is less crime. I don't think it's directly proportional at all. So that would be my...
And it's actually something that you can look at the statistics and answer. That's what I like to do. You know, show me the statistics, show me the data. And we know that there are more guns in America than there were 20 years ago, significantly more. But what nobody's taking credit for is that our violent crime and our homicide rate has dropped by 50% over the past 20 years. And the media is like painting the situation as if it's getting so much worse, but nobody's taking credit that we've gotten 50% better in the past 20 years. And there was no...
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that's anything to do with guns, though. That doesn't mean that's anything to do with having good guns.
It shows that it's the exact
As moderator, I'll butt in and what he says. What Merrill is saying, and I can actually back this up because I've been working on part 3, which is the relationship between guns and crime, is that the violent crime rates in the United States have been dropping since about the mid to late 80s. We had a big crime problem in the 80s, and it's dropped considerably since then. However, gun ownership has increased. So what he's trying to say is that there is no one-to-one correlation between weapons and crime.
Correct. And when you look at the FBI's data, you can tell exactly where that crime is coming from. You know, we know that it's doubling and tripling the national average when you look at metropolitan areas of 250,000 or greater. And nobody's bringing that up. So we know exactly where the problem areas are in America, and nobody's really addressing that. I mean, and the answer isn't simple. It's something that they're going to have to really dig in and look at education, you know, look at job opportunities, and people are just trying to find a simple answer. And I think guns have become the scapegoat, and there's just no data that supports it.
I thought that the whole reason, really, that this subject has come up recently and that people are getting quite concerned about it is because people just want to see less mass shootings. Like, you know, crime is crime. It's going to happen. All these, you know, there's more guns, there's less violent crime and all this. I mean, not to like dismay it, but that doesn't bother me. What bothers me as a person and a lot of other people is there anything that could be done about, you know, these massacre style shootings? And that's where the real concern is, and why I know me personally would even discuss this topic at all, really, because like I don't like to get too sidetracked by the fact of, you know, let's look at our crime stats, and because I think, you know, people should be able to deal with crime their own way, their government and whatever. I mean, to me, it's a separate debate. That's the only reason I mention it, is because I just feel like the only reason I would even, you know, stand up and say, you know, you should maybe look at stricter gun controls is to stop that kind of event happening.
Correct.
And I kind of feel like the crime in general isn't relative. I mean, I like it's good to talk about.
Guns
Obviously,
spark passion in people because it's such a divided issue. But what I'd like to bring up is that we don't blame fertilizer for the Unabomber, just like we don't blame box cutters for the terrorists in the 9/11 attacks. But somehow we're blaming firearms for these mass shooters.
I'm going to interrupt you here
go on.
because I think I know what JX23 is going to say, and that was kind of the point that I was trying to get at earlier that I think both of you may have missed. Does easy access to firearms, or any access at all, does that make mass shootings easier to accomplish? Does that make violent crime easier or more dangerous, or those sort of things?
Of course it does. It makes it so much easier because having the ability, I mean, when you have a gun and you have someone mentally unstable to the point where they want to cause damage and kill people, having a gun makes it a lot easier. And you can say they can do it other ways. You could stab people, you can poison people, you could do other. But I think, a lot of these people just get a buzz out of having the power of high power weapon and being able to just, if they want, just take out large proportion, amounts of people. And the only real thing that offers that with such ease is high power guns. You could do it with pistols, of course you could, but obviously that's something that's.
Well, the guy in Virginia Tech did. He had two pistols, extended mags.
Yeah, but I mean that's the same thing. I mean that's why people are just concerned that people have access to. Because if you just took those away, I mean, I know they could get them, but for instance, if someone here wanted to do something similar to these like school massacres, which basically are occurring, it would be very, very difficult. It would be possible, but it would be difficult, and I think that's the main reason you don't see it. It's just because of the difficulty of it. It's like you could say, someone's so hell-bent on doing it, they'll do it anyway with something else, but I mean, you don't tend to see it here because it's just. Although these people are, insane in some ways, they still will want to do something that's relatively easier. And a lot of times, these people are cowards, so they won't want to do anything that means they'll have to be brave, or they'll have to actually take people on or do anything that's going to cause them problems. They want to just have the power to just wipe people out and then go on their rampage. And then
the real problem, if you ask me, is the media. I mean, they make these guys overnight celebrities. And what these guys are looking to do is they want to make their mark in the world, and they want to be known. They want their personal life to be known, their issues. They want to be a household name. And what better way to do it than a mass shooting, which has become like a media phenomenon? I mean, I do not want to see, I can't stand it when I turn on the TV and for weeks on end I see some crazy guy with colored hair, getting exactly what he wanted. And I do think there is some things that we can do to nip this in the bud as far as mental health and identifying these people earlier. But getting rid of the guns is like, it's taking this tree down the wrong way. These guys are just looking for a body count. And there are certainly much better ways to get a body count than a gun. A gun might be the easiest way right now, but bombs are easy to make too. So it's not the right problem. It's the person that is the problem. It's not the tool that they chose to do this with. There are thousands of ways to do it in the way that they're doing it. This has just become a reoccurring thing because of how the media addresses it and turns these people into overnight celebrities.
To give you an easy example, there is a rash of stabbings in China. That's the Chinese version of our school shootings. They're actually not stabbings, they're slashings. I believe there's been 10 in the last 3 years for some. That's just the thing to do, I guess, when you lose your mind in China. You get a big butcher knife and you go slashing children. It's not nearly as dangerous as a weapon, but it does happen, and it happens at an alarming frequency.
It's the same thing when you look about the mental thought process behind a copycat serial killer. They've seen this other person do it, and they've seen the attention that this other person did it, or the attention that this other person got when they did it, and they want the same thing for themselves. And it's a completely different debate from gun control, if you ask me.
Okay, I've got one more topic to talk about before we wrap things up, because we're pushing on 20-something minutes now. What do both of you think about firearms used for protection in your own home? My bias here as a U.S. citizen, I do own firearms, and I do have them for protecting my own home. But what do you, either of you, feel about personal firearm ownership for protection? And we can extend that to concealed carry if you'd like to talk about that.
I think for here in the UK, I don't mind not having a gun. I mean, of course, you'd like to be able to defend yourself with a gun sometimes, if the worst was to happen. But, I have to look at it in terms of if we're talking about the US and their laws. If I didn't have a gun in the US, I wouldn't feel as comfortable because I know there's so many guns in circulation and that a lot of the criminals are probably going to carry a gun. And, here in the UK, of course, we get robberies and people come in with knives and they could get hold of weapons if they did try, but for the most part, it's less common. So, I mean, from my perspective, I'm okay with not having a gun in my house, and for the greater good, it's kind of working at the moment here. But I have to say, if I was American, I would definitely feel a bit apprehensive about the idea of not being able to protect myself with a weapon, just because they're a lot more common. So for me, I'm okay, but from your perspective, I would have a problem with it, I think. But it doesn't mean I'm pro guns if you're in America, of course. But I can definitely understand why a lot more Americans are keen to have a gun because, there's so many. It's such a gun culture that, you want to protect yourself.
There's a very small percentage of the population that actually owns a gun.
Fact checker, I'll disagree with you there. On average in the United States, it's around 35 to 40%, just kind of depending. And that's registered firearms.
I'd have to see the regional statistics. I mean,
regionally, it varies between 25 and upwards to 60%, depending on the state. It'd be hard to weight an easy average over everything when you've got different populations and densities and laws and stuff. But it's an easy figure to say about 1/3 or maybe a little bit more people own guns.
Wow.
I have to say, if I had small, unpredictable children as well, I probably would feel a lot less happy about having a gun in the house regardless. But as a single person or living with adults, I don't know. I suppose even then, because people are predictable, it would make me feel a bit nervous. I have to admit, just knowing there's a gun in the house, even if I live with a family member, it just feels that much more intense. So I don't know how I would feel, to be honest.
I also own a nightstand gun, and I also have 2 kids, and I think it's important to educate your children so their safety doesn't really bother me. They're going to be very educated about firearms, and they're going to know to respect the firearm, and that's what it's all about when it comes to your kids. Now, as far as owning one for my protection, I think it's important, not because I think whoever breaks into my home might have a gun, but I'm worried that anybody who breaks into my home might have some type of advantage over me. So if he has a knife, I want a gun. If he has a gun, I want an assault rifle. And if he has an assault rifle, I want an assault rifle with more ammo in it. And it's just that's my thought process.
Sorry.
I want to have an advantage over whoever is breaking into my home because no matter what, I should be able to take that on. And I take that responsibility very seriously because I'm not an MMA fighter. I'm a decently sized guy. I've been in a few fights. I've won a few, got my ass kicked in the others. And I don't think just because I didn't practice jiu-jitsu, I should lose a fight and lose my family because someone broke into my home. I want to have every advantage I can over that person. Now, what are the chances of that actually happening? Pretty slim. But in the end, as the father and as a parent, it's my responsibility. Your safety is your responsibility, and that's a scary thing for a lot of people. They want to pass that on to the police, and the fact of the matter is it takes about 20 minutes for them to get there.
Well, that depends on where you live. I was going to interject and say that there are some places in some neighborhoods the police are there in 5 minutes.
That's still
on average. United States,
you can have if you're paranoid about it. I mean, not paranoid because it's a real concern, but I mean, you can get a house alarm that will trigger the police as soon as
House
they
alarms
break
are
in.
one of the biggest jokes when it comes to home safety because police rarely respond to it in a timely fashion.
Because they get a lot of false alarms.
Yes.
My father used to sell alarms, and basically when the alarm goes off, they'll call you, or then they'll call the police. There's a little delay. But the reality is, even if you called the police the very instant somebody opened your door, in the best case scenario, the police will be there in 5 to 10 minutes.
And that's too long if you ask me.
Yeah, on
The
average in
problem
the
is,
United
though-
States, hold on, just bear with me.
Go
On
on.
average, it's closer to 20 or 30 minutes. And if you live in a more rural area, or if you live in a bad neighborhood, they're going to take a smoke break and a coffee break and then come do the cleanup. And I don't mean that as an insult to police officers, but you're either going to be driving 45 minutes out in the country, and a lot of police officers don't like to drive through shitty neighborhoods when they know something bad's going on. They like to be alive. So there are some places that you can beat where there is limited protection.
I have
Yeah,
a
I
number
suppose,
of... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the only problem is when you think like that, it's like, where does it end? Like, does that mean that you'd feel a lot safer if you had a gun in, while you were out shopping with your family in case
I do have
someone
a gun.
wants to
do.
attack you?
I'm out
In
shopping.
Texas, a lot of people do.
So everyone has a gun in their pocket, and
No.
but everyone's thinking, oh, I'd like to have the bigger gun in case that guy's got a better gun, and then I've got.
Not exactly,
What
no.
do you do? Just everyone walks around armed, and then everyone who doesn't have a gun lives in fear
that
of
is a
people who do have
misconception.
guns.
The population that has a concealed handgun license is very, very slow. Drifter, do you have a statistic on that? Because I know concealed
No,
handgun.
but it's nothing like actual gun ownership, though.
Gun ownership, that means they have a gun. Sometimes it's in the attic. It's
Yeah,
not
but
even
what
in
I'm saying is, if you're worried about it in the home, why aren't you as worried about it when you're out in public?
I am.
Some
I,
people
and
are.
I have a concealed handgun license, and I do care. I have a Kel-Tec.
So what about the
P11
people who don't? Should they be really scared?
No.
Then why should you be
They
scared in
shouldn't.
your home without a gun?
Wait, say that again.
Why should you be
Sometimes
so
I believe
scared
what
in
you're
your
getting
home
at. Sometimes
with your
this is a
gun?
personal perspective thing. Different people have different biases. I am a little bit more on the paranoid side of thing because of the way I was brought up, which wasn't entirely pleasant, and because through YouTube I get a lot of death threats. So in the near future, what I'm going to be doing is actually getting a concealed handgun license. And I know that sounds very paranoid, but you get a couple of death threats, you'll start taking it more seriously.
For me, it's not paranoia. I'm not paranoid that that's going to happen. I'm 99% sure nothing like that is ever going to happen to me and my family. But in the end, it is my responsibility, and that I do take seriously. So I'm going to have everything on me so that when and if it does happen, I am properly prepared, and I will have a clear conscience no matter what happens, that I tried my very best within legal limits.
So would you agree that everyone should think like you? Like, I'm not that you think they should.
I don't think everybody
but
is
you would
responsible enough. There are some people I
you
would never go to the range to. If you want to talk about gun control, I think there should be a next level of
I
citizenship.
don't think people should have to think like me. That's the answer. Even as the moderator, I can say that. I don't think that the way I think is entirely.
So wouldn't you
think
like to do something about that might change that, or if it just feels.
That's why I say I'm objective. I want education for people when it comes to them owning a gun. I think they should have to take a class. At any point in that class, they can get red flagged because someone in the class, they're trained in pointing out problems or problem people that are coming there to get educated to get their license.
But then it's up to human error, like as much as anything, and it's like,
I think
they thought they
education
were
is the
okay, but
best
they
key.
weren't.
Hold up. I believe the question is, should people think more like me and you, Merrill? Should we be concerned about protecting ourselves all the time? Because if that were common and almost everybody or everybody thought like that, everybody would just be walking around armed all the time. And I don't believe that is a very good thing at all.
No, but put it like this. If there were a mass shooting, I'm the guy you want to be there. Because I can tell you one thing about these people who are doing the mass shootings. They do not want to shoot out. They're fucking cowards. They don't want to
But
have
you could
anything to do
also
with the
say-
shootout. And they're going to take their life as soon as they feel themselves meeting any kind of resistance. They're there for the body count. So I'm the type of guy that you would want there.
Yeah, but you could also say that you're the last kind of person people would want to turn, and not saying that you would, of course, but for someone who was going to do a shooting, you're one of the last people that they'd hope would feel like that because you have guns and you know how to use them, and obviously not saying you would because you probably you're well educated and trained and you know better, but you're also the last person people would want around who actually had one of a psychotic turn or episode, which we're all liable to really, and but you can't control everything.
I'm the worst nightmare.
Yeah, it's a worst nightmare scenario. But
and that is just the problem with gun ownership, the reason that we're talking about that. I'm going to quote Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller, who did this interview with, I don't remember the name of the show, but it was kind of like The View, and there were lots of women saying we should ban assault rifles, we should ban this, and Call of Duty is evil, and he tried to do a more logical approach. And I'm going to be wrapping it up here. The majority of people that own weapons, the vast majority, 99.9%, they're not violent. They're not crazy, they never shoot anybody, they don't have accidents, and the weapons generally collect dust or get used at the range, sometimes hunting. Also, the vast majority of people that have mental disorders are relatively harmless. I wouldn't say they're completely harmless, but their outbursts are not as extreme as what most of you are imagining, violent shooting, stabbing, that sort of thing. There are some. And the problem is that for 99% of people or more, this is not a problem. Nobody cares, nobody would complain about it. But it's the other 1% of people, the truly deranged, the psychotic, the angry, and there are some people that are just genuinely evil and like doing evil things. It's an unpleasant thing to talk about, but there are some very bad people out there. It's the 1% of people that the gun laws need to be concerned about, most laws in general, because most people just do what they tell you they're going to do. It's the other 1% that causes all the problems. And occasionally good people get drunk, or they make bad decisions, or they have bad days, and that's why we have laws and protections, and that's why we're having this debate about gun ownership. This was our reasons not to own guns episode. I'm going to wrap it up with a little anecdote from the United Kingdom, where Jay here is from. And in the United Kingdom, police officers do not carry weapons. And this may sound crazy to those of you that live in the United States, but police officers carry no weapons whatsoever. I believe it was the police officers union, if I'm not mistaken, but they put a vote around to all the officers and the chiefs and all that sort of stuff. And the question was, do you believe that the officers should start carrying guns as standard? Because that was an option to equip every police officer with a weapon. And it was about 85-ish% of them voted no, we do not want to carry weapons. And that sounds crazy, but their logic was that they mostly deal with people that have baseball bats or knives or brass knuckles and fistfights and not weapons. And they believe that if the police officers start carrying weapons, then the criminals that are going to commit crimes anyway, for the most part, are going to upgrade themselves and also start carrying weapons. So when police get called in, instead of having to deal with pepper spray and taser and fistfights, they're going to have to start dealing with gunfights and SWAT teams and flak jackets and that kind of stuff. And the police actually felt safer without weapons. And I'm not going to give anybody a response to that because we're wrapping up the episode. We've been talking here forever. I hope that those of you that have listened to all of this have learned something genuinely useful. Even if this episode didn't tickle your particular fancies, I hope that you learned something about critical thinking or perspective or differences on opinion and how to respect those. And I'm going to turn it over to John and then Sergeant Merrill to close us out with any closing comments.
Well, first of all, I'll say everyone stop sending Drifter death threats, because that's not cool. And yeah, it's nice. I think in general, I'll just say that my view is I understand that it's different. There are some British people that say we don't have guns here, and it's not as much of a problem. So you guys should probably follow our suit, and things might be better. But I think it's different to that, and we have to consider the culture that is in America. There's so many guns in circulation, people brought up differently. But it also worries me when I hear some Americans saying, well, let's not change things because the shootings are a worry, and it's a worry that people just say I'd rather have my gun than increase safety for other people. But they're two different cases, so I don't think either's right. But something different for the US, I think, should maybe be done. I don't think it should be left as it is, but I can understand how it's definitely different to how it is over here anyway. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, with my closing comments, I'd just like to say for everybody to just calm down, and we need to come to an amicable solution for both sides. And emotions can't get into this. There are so many people who are so passionate about this topic, and that's going to be a real problem if we let emotions dictate what the law is going to be for everybody. That shouldn't be the case. We should sit down, we should be calm, we should look at the statistics, look at the data, and come up with a very reasonable answer that can be explained without using traumatic events and traumatic anomalies as the answer for those, whatever solution we come up with. So that's all I have to say, is for people to just use their heads, pull their emotions out of it, take a breath, and we'll get through this.
Well, that's all for this incredibly long episode. I might have to break it into 2 parts, but I hope you enjoyed it. Drifter out.